AJ Green, and for my microbiology topic, I've chosen to do mine on the Black Death or the bubonic plague. This was a disease that ran rampant throughout the late 14th century from 1347 all the way through 1351. Now, the notorious Black Death, we will be covering this today and discussing just how it began and basically the pure devastation that it left behind on the world, and particularly Europe. We will be covering this in 4 different sections. For the first section, we will be talking about what it is, basically just an overview of the plague and how it affected humans. And for the second, we'll be covering when it began, basically a timeline of when this disease first started spreading and their first encounter with it, and how it started to spread amongst the population at the time. And for the third section, we'll be talking about interesting facts, and these are just unknown facts or details that are usually not discussed when on this topic. And then the last section, we'll be talking about life after the plague, so just everything that had happened afterwards. And because it's such an important event in history, we'll be talking about just how it affected the course of history after. So let's get started. For the first part, we'll be talking about what is the bubonic plague, what causes it, and the symptoms. So the bubonic plague is a bacterial infection that affects mainly the body's lymphatic system, and it basically leaves these the lymph nodes discolored. It's like a black discoloration, and they're called buboes. And this is basically where the bubonic plague, where it got its name. And it nearly wiped out a third or 2/3 of the population, which is a great number of the population. And this was happening around the late 14th century. Now, at the time, they accepted the idea or this concept that the diseases were caused due to inhaling bad or poisoned air. Usually they had stated from rotting corpses at the time, or bad vegetation, or stagnant water. And so they were basically saying that this is where the bubonic plague came from, is from them inhaling all this bad air. So therefore, at the time when doctors would go and treat patients, they would wear these bird-like masks as seen in the second slide. And basically what they did was they wore that to keep from inhaling this unpurified, this dirty air, poison air. And they usually stuffed herbs and some other things in the beak just to purify the air for them. And so that is the miasma theory. Now, what causes it is actually the bacterium Yersinia pestis, and this is usually transmitted through infected fleas that rode around on rodents, which was very common in the ships where they traveled on at the time, all the way back then. And it usually affected both animals and humans. So it not only had a great effect on humans, but animals as well. And so the bubonic plague already was a really bad disease that caused a lot of harm, but if left untreated can turn into one of these 2 things. So the first, we have the septicemic plague, and that is when the bubonic plague is left untreated, it starts to spread into the bloodstream and can cause fevers, chills, shock, bleeding into the organs, and usually can lead to the discoloration. And so the other can also turn into pneumonic plague, which is when it starts to spread into the lungs, causing a lung infection. Now, pneumonic plague is almost always fatal if it is left untreated, and it also causes fevers, chills, shortness of breath, and all that really bad stuff. So usually it can turn into one of these things if it is not treated. And this is the signs and the symptoms of the bubonic plague. So we have the picture over here of the fingers turning black due to death of the tissue. We have high fever and chills, headaches, the buboes, the swollen lymph nodes that are all over the body. And then we have also the experience of weakness and delusion. So where did it all begin? This is the second section we'll be covering, and it's basically when was the first encounter, how was it spread, who did it affect, and was there treatments for it. Now, the first encounter they had with it was when these 12 ships sailed in from the Black Sea, and the people of the town discovered that there were dead bodies on this ship that arrived. They were almost all dead bodies. There were very few that were left surviving, but what they noticed that was a common occurrence amongst them was that they had these black boils all over their body that were bloody, and they were leaking pus, and it was just like a horrifying sight for them. And they were this was happening at first in October in Europe in the year 1347, which is when it all began. This is a picture of the ship. And then how was it was spread was that the pathogen, the bacteria Yersinia pestis, was actually spreading through the bite of the infected rats or the fleas, and it was going around on traveling trading ships, which is why it was spread so easily amongst the other continents and other countries. And it was very, very contagious. Even through like the touch of clothes, it can be transmitted. And so this was the danger of it spreading so fast. Who did it affect? Millions of Europeans, because it was mostly very damaging, and it was spreading throughout Europe at the time, but it also affected China, India, Persia, Syria, and Egypt in the early 1340s, which would make sense because I believe that they were the trading, that's who they were trading with at the time. It was very close by, and this is just a map right here of the different years and where it started spreading. So 1347, we have it starts to approach Asia, and then the rest of the years it begins to spread and eventually turns into a pandemic. So the treatment, they practice unsophisticated practices like bloodletting, which was basically withdrawing blood and using it for therapeutical uses, or boil lancing, which is when they cut the boil or the abscess to allow drainage to get rid of the infection, all the bad stuff. And they also did superstitious practices like taking rose water or vinegar baths, or basically burning aromatic herbs and all that. It was very, very odd. It was inevitable for the most part, because even healthy people tried to keep themselves away, but eventually they were affected. And so therefore it was mostly rich people that tried to close themselves off from the poor people, but it still affected millions. There are 3 interesting facts that we have. It's our third section. The first is that the bubonic plague was used as a biological weapon. There was a war between ships at one point, and they basically used rotting corpses that have died from the bubonic plague that contracted it, and they launched these rotting corpses to other ships as a form of a weapon, which was very insane. And then the second is that there was a movement, a religious movement called the Flagellant movement, where basically members of religious churches or other like monks, they took the streets and they started whipping themselves because they believed the bubonic plague was a punishment from God, which was very crazy. And then the last is that the idea or concept of the quarantine was derived from this time. Actually, it was first introduced during the Black Death. So the life after, they suffered greatly. The production of things and trading and labor workers went down because it wiped out a lot of the population, which also led to not a lot of workers, and not the trading lessened because there weren't anybody to go and do the trading. And then also the doctors learn more, they gain more medical knowledge from experiencing it firsthand and treating these patients. And also, the religious movement intensified, the practices became more intense. And so therefore, it later led to the split, the Reformation. In conclusion, the bubonic plague that caused the Black Death wiped out over 500,000 people back in the late 1400s, which was a great devastation. It was a horrific event that not only took the lives of all the poor and rich, the young and old, but also changed the course of our history forever. I hope that we can take from this and take measures in the future to ensure that something like this, like the effects of the plague, never happen again. Thank you.